The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the wooden cabin windows at Wildwood Haven, a small sanctuary nestled deep in the Montana forest. The golden rays cast a warm glow across the living room, creating a cozy atmosphere in the rustic space. Inside, on the worn brown leather sofa placed in the center of the room, Bella was lounging with her distinctive spotted tan coat, tufted ears, and powerful 30-pound frame. The adult Bobcat looked every bit like a queen on her throne. Bella's intelligent amber eyes followed the tigers hunting on the TV screen, her ears perking up whenever a roar came through the speakers. Occasionally, she made small vocalizations, as if conversing with her distant relatives on screen, her sharp claws extended and retracted as she stretched comfortably, making a slight depression in the sofa cushions worn by years of use. Sarah Morgan, a 52-year-old woman with graying hair and crinkles around her eyes. Marks of years spent working outdoors, observed Bella from the kitchen table where she was preparing dinner. The aroma of beef and vegetables filled the cozy space. After 2 years of living together, she was still amazed by the sight of a wild bobcat relaxing on the sofa, watching TV like a normal family member. Tom, Sarah's husband, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard and the calloused hands of a former forest ranger, entered the living room with a steaming cup of tea. Steam rose from the mug, mingling with the distinctive pine scent of the cabin. He approached the sofa, wanting to sit down after a long day caring for the other animals at the sanctuary. Bella glanced at him, then slowly shifted her position, but only enough to leave a small space at the corner of the sofa. This was clearly the maximum concession she was willing to make. Bella's daily routines had become an integral part of the Morgan family's life. Each morning she would leave her specially designed outdoor area and wait at the cabin's back door. No yowling, no scratching, just standing there patiently, her amber eyes staring at the door until it opened. Her morning routine included a light meal in the kitchen, followed by sunbathing by the window until noon. But it was in the evening that Bella truly displayed her most unusual habits. At exactly 7:00 p.m., as if guided by an internal clock, she would appear at the back door once again, and when let in, she would walk straight to her favorite sofa, jump up with the grace characteristic of felines, and claim the central position, the best spot for watching TV. Bella came to Wildwood Haven 2 years ago, a frightened and emaciated 8-month-old kitten, after being rescued from an illegal hunting operation. Her mother had been killed by poachers, and Bella herself had nearly been sold into the illegal exotic animal trade, if not for the timely intervention of wildlife officers who discovered her in a rusty cage hidden under the poacher's truck. Those first weeks were difficult. Bella was too weak, just skin and bones with dull eyes that held none of the wildness they should have. An infected wound on her right paw made her fight for survival each night. Sarah and Tom took turns staying up, worried whether Bella would make it to morning. They had to feed her with a syringe every few hours, clean her frail body with warm cloths, and administer antibiotics as directed by the veterinarian. Whether it was the medication, Sarah's determination, or some inner resilience they hadn't recognized, Bella began to improve. She started eating naturally, became more alert, and finally showed the playfulness characteristic of a young bobcat. By spring, her physical recovery was remarkable. The frost-bitten paw had healed, though she would always have a slight limp. Her coat had grown thick and glossy, and her once skinny frame had developed the powerful muscles characteristic of her species. But something was different about Bella. While they tried to minimize human imprinting with their other rescues, it quickly became apparent that Bella's early experience with humans had permanently altered her relationship with her own kind. When they attempted to introduce her to another rescued bobcat of similar age, being rehabilitated for eventual release, Bella showed no interest. Instead, she repeatedly sought out human company, displaying none of the natural weariness essential for her survival in the wild. The decision to classify her as a permanent resident wasn't made lightly. Sarah and Tom spent countless hours discussing her case, consulting with wildlife rehabilitation experts across the country, and even bringing in a specialist from the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology Department. The conclusion was that Bella was irrevocably imprinted. The critical period for learning natural bobcat behavior had been disrupted by early human contact. Releasing her would be a death sentence as she lacked hunting skills, natural caution around humans, and territorial behaviors. What none of them had anticipated was Bella's peculiar fascination with the sofa and TV. It all started on a frigid winter evening when snow lay thick outside and temperatures dropped below zero. Sarah and Tom were watching TV on the sofa when Bella sneaked in from her designated area. Usually she would keep a safe distance, but that night, perhaps due to the cold or curiosity, she approached the sofa. Sarah and Tom sat motionless, hardly daring to breathe for fear of frightening her. She observed the sofa from a distance for several minutes, then slowly moved closer, and then a graceful leap. Instantly, Bella had curled up between Sarah and Tom as if it were the most natural thing in the world. From that day forward, the sofa officially became Bella's territory. At first, she simply enjoyed the comfort of the sofa and the warmth from Sarah and Tom. But then something strange happened. Bella began to notice the TV. Initially, it was just curious glances at the moving images and sounds, but gradually she began to show clear preferences. Wildlife documentaries always captured her attention. She would sit still, her head slightly tilted, eyes fixed on the screen whenever big cats appeared. Sometimes if Tom changed the channel too soon, Bella would express her disapproval with a soft growl or a displeased look. That evening after dinner, Tom reminded Sarah about the upcoming inspection. A new wildlife officer, Jane Foster, would be coming tomorrow. Sarah felt anxious. Annual inspections weren't new. Running a small wildlife sanctuary meant complying with numerous regulations and permits. But a new officer was always an unknown variable, especially one rumored to be very strict about regulations. Sarah knew that the way Bella lived on the sofa watching TV as part of the family wasn't the conventional way to keep a bobcat, even one that couldn't be reintegrated into the wild. Most permanent care facilities still maintain distance from the animals, keeping them in environments as natural as possible. But Bella was a special case. She had become part of the Morgan family. The doorbell rang suddenly, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. Bella immediately sat upright, her ears perked in alertness. No one visited them at this hour, especially on a cold autumn night in Montana. Tom went to open the door while Sarah held Bella closer as if she could protect the bobcat with her own body. Sarah listened to the footsteps in the hallway, the creaking door opening, and then a woman's cold voice resonating through the cabin. Jane Foster, wildlife officer from the Department of Wildlife Protection, had arrived a day early due to an urgent report about improper wildlife keeping at this address. Sarah's heart pounded as Tom returned to the living room with a young woman in a ranger uniform, clipboard in hand. Jane Foster stopped in her tracks as soon as she entered the room, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of Sarah and Bella on the sofa. In the warm light of the cabin, the contrast couldn't be more striking. A full-grown bobcat, a wild predator born to roam the deep forests, curled up on a sofa, comfortable in human arms like an ordinary house cat. "Oh my God," Jane blurted out. "So it's true." Jane Foster declared the situation completely unacceptable. A full-grown bobcat watching TV on a sofa. This was no way to treat a protected wild species. She was a young woman, perhaps just over 30, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and cold eyes behind metal frame glasses. Every gesture radiated the rigid professionalism of someone who followed rules to the letter. Sarah explained that Bella was a special case determined to be non-releasable by leading experts in the field. Her voice trembled, but remained determined like a mother protecting her child. But Jane wouldn't accept it. She argued that even if non-releasable, Bella should still be maintained in as natural an environment as possible, not living like a house cat. Wild animals, even non-releasable ones, must have their natural essence respected, Jane declared, her pen tapping lightly on the clipboard. This isn't just about regulations. It's about respect for the species. Tom pulled out a thick folder from the filing cabinet containing expert assessments from professionals like Dr. James Wilson from the University of Montana and Dr. Elena Martinez, a wildlife veterinarian, both confirmed that Bella was irrevocably imprinted on humans and that her current environment was best for her physical and mental health. Jane skimmed through the documents with an unchanging expression, but insisted that rules were rules. She demanded to see Bella's outdoor area, suspicious that it didn't meet the necessary standards. As Tom led Jane outside to inspect the outdoor area, Sarah held Bella closer. Through the window, moonlight illuminated the 500 square meter area, specially designed for Bella, with climbing structures reaching up to 5 meters high, flat rocks, placed at various heights, a small stream flowing through one corner, and countless toys and enrichment devices. Sarah and Tom had spent months and a significant portion of their life savings creating this space, and it far exceeded the minimum standards required by regulations. She could hear Tom's patient voice explaining each detail of the area. And even Jane had to admit that the outdoor space was well designed, but she still insisted that Bella shouldn't live indoors. Although Tom explained that it was Bella's choice, Jane maintained that this was precisely the problem, anthropomorphizing a bobcat to the point of believing she could make choices like a human. When they returned to the living room, the inspection continued with permits and medical records. Sarah pointed out that Bella was in perfect health, mentally stable, with no signs of stress or abnormal behavior. Her health indicators were superior to most captive bobcats. Jane acknowledged the good health indicators, but still insisted that rules were rules. The atmosphere in the room was so tense it could be cut with a knife. Sarah and Tom felt like they were fighting for their own child. And then, as the argument continued, Bella, who had been observing the situation from her safe position on the sofa, suddenly jumped down. This movement caught everyone's attention. With light and graceful steps, Bella approached Jane. There were no signs of aggression, no growling, no tail thrashing, no flattened ears, just cautious curiosity in each step. She stopped about half a meter from Jane, sat down, and simply looked. Her amber eyes seemed to be assessing the young woman before her. Jane stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with a full-grown bobcat voluntarily approaching her. Sarah assured her that Bella wasn't aggressive, just curious. And then, after sitting and observing for a moment, Bella did something unexpected. She moved one step closer and gently rubbed her head against Jane's leg. "This is exactly the problem," Jane said, trying to maintain her professional tone despite her obvious confusion. "Bobcats shouldn't voluntarily approach humans like this. This is abnormal behavior, a result of excessive anthropomorphization." Sarah gently countered that this wasn't a problem, but the result of an animal who had found safety after trauma. Bella wasn't a typical bobcat, but each creature has its own story and needs. This was the best environment for her. Night had fallen, and after hours of inspection and argument, Jane announced she would return tomorrow morning to complete the inspection. She warned the Morgans to prepare themselves for the possibility that Bella might need to be transferred to Blue Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a facility that maintained minimal human interaction and a more appropriate environment for a bobcat. Sarah was stunned by this idea. Moving Bella away from the only home and the only people she trusted would be a devastating trauma. She felt tears welling up but held them back, not wanting to worry Bella. After Jane left, the cabin fell into a heavy silence. Sarah and Tom sat on the sofa, Bella between them discussing their options. They decided to call Dr. Elena Martinez, the wildlife veterinarian who had been following Bella since day one, and Dr. James Wilson from the University of Montana, who had diagnosed Bella as irrevocably imprinted. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the Montana wind blowing through the pine branches outside and Tom's steady breathing beside her. In her mind, she kept thinking about Bella, about the first day the small, frightened bobcat had come to them, about the process of her gradually trusting them, and about the magical moment when Bella first jumped on the sofa, finding the place where she truly belonged. Sarah couldn't bear the thought of Bella being taken to a strange place, cared for by strangers, separated from the familiar things that gave her a sense of security. If she put herself in Bella's position, would she understand what was happening, or would she think she had been abandoned once again? The next morning, veterinarian Elena Martinez arrived early. A Latina woman in her 40s with boundless energy and sharp dark eyes, Elena had been a valuable ally of Wildwood Haven from the very beginning. She understood better than most the delicate balance between respecting the wild nature of animals and meeting the special needs of those who couldn't be reintegrated into the wild. After hearing about the situation, Elena immediately examined Bella to update her medical records. She checked Bella's eyes, ears, teeth, and weight, assessed her coat condition, and even took blood samples for analysis. Physical condition, perfect. Mental state stable. No signs of stress or abnormal behavior, she noted, her pen flying across the page. Conclusion: a bobcat thriving in her current environment. Dr. James Wilson arrived shortly after. He was a tall, thin man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Carrying a backpack full of equipment and a thick notebook, Wilson was one of the leading experts on North American bobcat behavior. With over 30 years of research in the field, he spent time observing Bella in different environments, indoors, outdoors, on the sofa, and interacting with Sarah and Tom. He took constant notes, occasionally taking photos or short videos to document Bella's specific behaviors. "Remarkable," Wilson commented as Bella naturally jumped on the sofa to watch TV, her head tilting slightly with the images on screen. This isn't just simple anthropomorphization. This is conscious adaptation. Bella is creating a social identity within her environment, a hybrid identity between wild bobcat and house pet. He proposed an experiment, taking Bella to the outdoor area and observing her reaction when separated from her family. Sarah led Bella outside through the secure passage connecting the cabin with the outdoor area. Bella followed Sarah willingly, but as soon as Sarah turned to go back inside, her behavior visibly changed. Initially, Bella explored the area normally, sniffing at familiar spots, climbing up a high structure to observe the surroundings, but she kept looking back at the cabin. Her ears perked, listening for any sounds from inside. After about 15 minutes, instead of continuing to explore the stimulating outdoor environment, Bella returned to the door, clearly wanting to go inside. She stood there staring at the door, her ears moving towards sounds from inside, clearly expressing her desire to return to Sarah and Tom. "As I suspected," Wilson noted, observing through the window, "Bella no longer identifies as a wild bobcat. She has developed a hybrid identity, part bobcat, part pet, entirely Bella. Forcing her to live in an environment that only addresses half of her identity would cause serious psychological damage." Sarah also called a lawyer specializing in wildlife law, Christine Reynolds. Christine couldn't come in person, but via video call, she reviewed all of Wildwood Haven's permits and documents, providing valuable advice. Fortunately, there's a clause in federal regulations allowing for habitat adaptations based on documented special needs of the individual. Christine explained, "This is exactly Bella's case. You need to prove that the current care model is necessary for her psychological health, not just your preference." When the doorbell rang, announcing Jane Foster's return, everyone was ready. Beside Sarah and Tom stood Elena Wilson and two longtime volunteers from the sanctuary who could provide practical perspectives on Bella's daily behavior. Jane entered, surprised to see an entire group waiting for her. Her dark hair was still pulled back tightly, her face still stern, but there was a slight hesitation in her step, a sign she had been thinking about the situation since last night. "I see you've prepared thoroughly," Jane remarked, her tone still professional, but no longer as cold as before. She began her inspection, this time more thoroughly. She checked every detail of the outdoor area, reviewed every page in the medical records, and even conducted a formal interview with Wilson about his assessment of Bella. "Dr. Wilson," Jane asked, "as an expert on bobcat behavior, can you tell me why a more wild environment would not be suitable for Bella?" Wilson explained that animals, like humans, develop identities and behaviors based on their early experiences. In Bella's case, the critical period for forming her wild bobcat identity had been disrupted by early human contact. As a result, she had developed a hybrid identity in which interaction with humans and domestic environmental cues, like the sofa, had become integral to her sense of security and happiness. Bardiadora. Forcing Bella to live in an environment that only addresses the bobcat aspect without addressing the domesticated aspect of her identity would cause chronic stress, potentially leading to immunosuppression, hormonal imbalances, and even behavioral disorders. He concluded throughout this process, Bella behaved normally, confident but not aggressive, curious but not invasive. She spent most of her time on the sofa, occasionally looking toward the group with curiosity. Sometimes she would stretch, arch her back, or change position to get a better view of what was happening. These actions highlighted her wild beauty, the soft curve of muscles under her spotted coat, the grace of each movement, but also her remarkable comfort in a human environment. After hours of inspection, Jane sat down to discuss the results. She acknowledged that Bella was excellently cared for physically. The outdoor area far exceeded minimum standards. The experts agreed that Bella could not be reintegrated into the wild, but the issue of the sofa and TV remained. Jane argued that this violated guidelines about keeping wildlife as wild as possible, even when they can't be released. I understand that each case is different, she admitted, her voice softer than yesterday. But regulations exist for a reason. If we start allowing exceptions, where's the line? How many wildlife keepers will use this as a precedent to justify keeping wild animals as house pets? Wilson made a strong scientific argument that in Bella's case, trying to impose a more wild environment would cause serious psychological trauma. That's not humane, he concluded. And if we care about animal welfare, we must look at each individual, not just the species. One of the volunteers, Maria, told about how Bella had once reacted when separated from her familiar environment during a major storm that forced them to evacuate temporarily. She refused to eat, paced constantly, and even began pulling out her fur. All signs of extreme stress, she recounted. And that was just for 2 days. Jane listened to everything, not revealing her thoughts. Finally, she stood up and requested to be alone with Bella. I need to assess her without any influence from anyone else, she explained. This is a standard requirement in wildlife assessments. Sarah, Tom, and the experts waited anxiously in the kitchen, while Jane was alone with Bella in the living room. Through the half-open door, they could see Jane sitting on the sofa at a safe distance from Bella. The Bobcat observed her with the natural caution of a wild cat, her amber eyes missing none of Jane's movements. Jane didn't move, didn't say anything, just sat there. This method was used to assess the real comfort level of wild animals when near humans without familiar caretakers around. A truly wild bobcat would become tense, highly alert, or even aggressive. Gradually, Bella moved closer, still cautious but curious. She moved with the grace of a predator, but with no signs of aggression. Each movement was carefully calculated, her amber eyes never leaving Jane. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, Bella jumped on the sofa and sat next to Jane, not touching her, but close enough that Jane could feel the warmth from the bobcat's fur. And then, as if to make her point, Bella turned her head toward the turned-off TV and made a small vocalization, a sound that Sarah and Tom knew all too well. It was her way of requesting the TV to be turned on. When Jane finally called everyone back to the living room, her face was no longer as rigid as before. There was a subtle change in her eyes, a new understanding. I have reviewed all the evidence, she said, and consulted with the experts. I've also spent time observing Bella in her environment, and I must admit, this is a special case. Jane took a stack of papers from her bag. This is my official report. I will recommend issuing a special permit for Wildwood Haven to continue caring for Bella in the current manner with some conditions. Sarah and Tom couldn't believe their ears. They looked at each other, then back at Jane, hardly daring to believe they had actually convinced her. First, quarterly health checks with full reports sent to my office. Second, complete documentation of Bella's behavior and habits so we can better understand this special case. And third, mom beer. Jane paused, and for the first time a small smile appeared on her face. I suggest Wildwood Haven develop an educational program around Bella's case to educate the public about the risks of attempting to keep wildlife as pets while sharing her special story. Sarah and Tom agreed immediately, the relief evident on their faces. Wilson and Elena also nodded in approval, knowing this was a much better outcome than they had dared hope for. We've had ideas about an educational program, Tom shared, excitement clear in his voice, using Bella's story to raise awareness about the impact of illegal hunting and the dangers of keeping wildlife as pets. We're writing a grant proposal for this. Good, Jane nodded. I'll write a letter of support for that proposal. If we can turn this special case into an educational opportunity, then this will be a win-win situation. As everyone signed the necessary paperwork, Bella remained on the sofa, watching with a self-satisfied look, as if she knew she had won. The TV was still playing a wildlife documentary, and when a leopard appeared on screen, Bella tilted her head with genuine interest, her ears perking up to listen to the distant roar of her wild relative. As Jane prepared to leave, She paused beside the sofa. "Thank you for showing me something new," she said quietly to Bella. "I've worked with preserved wildlife for many years, but never encountered a case like yours." The bobcat looked at her with intelligent amber eyes, and for a moment there seemed to be an understanding between the two beings. A woman who had dedicated her life to protecting wildlife in the way she thought best, and a bobcat who had found her own path. "I'll be back to check in 3 months," Jane told Sarah and Tom as she walked to the door. "And I look forward to seeing the first report on your educational program." As Jane's car disappeared around the bend in the dirt road, leading away from Wildwood Haven, Sarah and Tom hugged each other tightly, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They had fought for Bella and won. That evening, as the sunset painted the Montana sky in reds and golds, Sarah, Tom, and Bella sat on the sofa, watching a new documentary about big cats. Bella curled up between them, comfortable and safe, occasionally making small vocalizations when seeing Siberian tigers gliding through snow. "You know," Sarah whispered to Tom, stroking Bella's soft fur, "when we started this sanctuary, I never imagined our most powerful ambassador would be a bobcat who thinks she's part of the family." "Home is where you're understood," Tom replied, looking down at Bella with love in his eyes. Bella understood that before we did. Outside, the Montana night grew cold and still, stars blazing in the vast darkness above the mountains. Somewhere in that vast space, wild bobcats began their nightly hunts, moving like ghosts through the pine forests, each with their own story, each seeking a place to exist, a place to thrive. But here in the warm light of the cabin, Bella had found her place, not in the wilderness where she was born, but on a sofa beside the humans who had become her family. And perhaps that was a different kind of wilderness, one that had adapted, evolved, found a way to survive and thrive in an ever-changing world. Bella stretched, extending her powerful forelegs, claws extending, then retracting. Then she curled up again, her head resting on Sarah's lap, eyes still following the TV screen. A bobcat on a sofa, a contradiction, an impossible combination, a story of love, adaptation, and finding family in unexpected places.